So good morning and good evening to everyone who's calling in. I believe people are going to trickle in from the waiting room over the next minute, so we'll give everyone a minute or two to get fully into the call before we begin. Thank you for joining us today. So for those who have just joined, we're giving everyone a minute or two to come in from the waiting room. I'm still seeing a trickle of people counting up. So we'll give everyone another minute or so before we get into the meat of the discussion today. All right, I think most of those who are in the waiting room are now on the call. I do expect we'll get a few late joiners, but we'll go ahead and get started for the discussion. So good morning and good evening to everyone who's calling in, depending if you're joining us from the United States or from Southeast Asia. We are absolutely delighted to have you back with us for today's event, Where's the Water? Mekong Wet Season 2025. We're going to go ahead and jump into things, but as those of you who have joined before know, this is a regular seasonal update that we do. For those of you who are new to the discussion, we try to do these every 6 to 8 months, highlighting what's happened in the most recent season and projecting what's coming. So in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and get into the meat of things. So my name is Courtney Weatherby. I'm the Deputy Director for our Southeast Asia program and a fellow with our Energy, Water, and Sustainability program here at the Stimson Center. And our team at Stimson, in collaboration with many friends and colleagues in the United States and across the Mekong region, some of whom are on the call today, use satellite data, remote sensing, and on-the-ground data from gauges run by the Mekong River Commission, as well as reporting from local dam operators and local communities to track how dams affect the Mekong River's flow and the health of the system more broadly. So we currently monitor about 60 dams in the basin on a near real-time basis with weekly updates. And then we try to do these deep dives on a somewhat regular basis a couple of times a year. So this is our seasonal briefing looking at what's been going on recently. So a range of sort of summary of what happened during the recent dry season, forecasting for the wet season, and then also touching base on time-sensitive issues like recent flooding incidents and also the wastewater from mines that has polluted river systems. So as many of you who are observers of the river know, the Mekong 2025 wet season is currently experiencing wetter conditions than in recent years. The Tonle Sap did reverse course a little earlier than expected, and the flood pulse is at a higher level than it has been over the last 5 years. And we're going to get a little bit of a deep dive into, what the current situation is, what's happened during the dry season, and how that lays things out for this wet season, and a little bit of projections. So we're going to kick things off with comments from the Mekong Dam Monitor co-leads, Brian Eiler and Alan Basiste. And then after that, we'll turn over the second portion of the presentations today for a discussion of some recent events that are quite important related to the mining pollution issues. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Brian Eiler for that forecasting. So Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Courtney. And it's great to see you back at the Stimson Center, back from maternity leave. And we're just happy to have our newest intern, the Mekong intern. So again, Courtney, welcome back. I'm going to share my screen and get going. So welcome everyone to our seasonal update. And we're going to focus a bit on the last dry season, looking at what happened over the course of the last dry season, and then shift into this wet season. I'll take care of the dry season. What happens in dry season does have an impact on the subsequent wet season where we are now. But my co-lead and colleague, Alan Basiste, will handle a description of what's happening in the wet season and look forward into the rest of the wet season months. It's always important to start with China's dams. Why do we start with China's dams? Well, they're the biggest. Xiaowan, Norjiadu are huge. Their reservoirs, not only can they be seen from outer space, they're as large as the largest reservoirs in the United States. So if you're familiar with Lake Mead or Lake Powell behind the Hoover Dam or the Glen Canyon Dam out in the west, these are huge dams that can either restrict water during the wet season and therefore the river is flowing at lower levels downstream, or they can release water during the dry season for hydropower production. And when they do that, they raise the level of the river downstream. It's very important to remember that the Mekong survives and thrives and is mighty through its annual flood pulse. So that means the peak of the flood pulse needs to be high and strong during the wet season in order to create the robust fishery that is the Mekong, to provide protein for the people of Cambodia, to drive agricultural production in Vietnam, and to serve supermarkets throughout the world through the export of food products from countries like Vietnam and Thailand. It's a natural flooding system that does that. And what both climate and dams can do is change that pulse, essentially pull down the peak and stunt it so that reservoirs can be charged, electricity can be produced, but at the expense of fisheries and agricultural production. And often the electricity might be produced in China, and then the fisheries impacts are far downstream in Cambodia. So there's an imbalance in the type of benefits that and costs that come from the hydropower production. So starting with China's dams, last year, if you tuned in to us in December, you would have remembered that we discovered that China's reservoirs are the highest levels that they had been in many, many years. So that's that high bar that you see in 2024. And Norjiadu and Xiaowan have about the capacity of 10 cubic kilometers of storage. So we saw them fill up and we said, hey, when they fill up as high as they can go, the subsequent dry season, which is the season we just went through, is going to be a little rocky because they're going to release all their water downstream and cause higher river levels downstream, either on a daily basis or just overall across the season. And those spikes can cause damage to farms along the river, or the seasonal rising of the river can kill trees that need to be exposed during the dry season and have other many different impacts. So we said, buckle up, because it's very likely that the dry season will be, the river level will be higher than normal. But what happened was China's dams didn't release as much water as they restricted. In fact, less than half. We speculate as to why that is. Perhaps economic slowdown in China is requiring less hydropower to be produced. There could have been other reasons, but the data show and the satellite images show that those reservoirs did not release as much water as they could. Now, what kind of an impact did those releases have on the immediate downstream? Here's where we go to Chiang Saen. So this chart is missing a label. It should say Chiang Saen, Thailand, which is the closest gauge to China. And it receives the biggest impact from these, I guess the most recordable impact from China's dams, because it's the closest to China. And there are a lot of lines here on this chart. The one to pay attention to is the blue line at the bottom. That's the normal valley of the dry season, which should be hitting its low point in March or April. That's what 60 years of data show us. Excuse me. The green line is how dam releases from China impacted that gauge. So what you see is a lot of erratic spikes. Those are day-to-day releases. And then overall, the level is much higher, particularly compared to 2023, which is the dark blue line, and 2024, the yellow line, where reservoir restrictions in their previous wet seasons were actually quite low, like extremely low, and those dams just didn't fill up. And that was at a time when we were saying that these dams might be a bad bet because the water just isn't there to fill the reservoirs and make it work. Therefore, they can't produce as much electricity as they should. So why are you doing this? China, building these large dams. Well, we can see what the effects are of when reservoirs do release water. And the releases were not, again, as much as they could have been. That green line could have been a lot higher and a lot more erratic than what it was. But still, we see higher river levels in March and April. That would have been the point when the turbines are spinning and the electricity is producing the most. And then during this April and May period, the river level went down, suggesting that that was a point where reservoirs were not releasing their water. And we're learning a lot about how these dams are operating under certain conditions. And we're actually seeing some improvement. This is a slide from a past from our wet season webinar, where we're saying during times of differential natural flow, so the river flows naturally differently during wet season to wet season. Some wet seasons are wet, some are low. This is the blue line that you see here on the graph. When the blue line is low, that's just low natural flow condition. It's climate driven. We're seeing a lot of climate variability in the hydrology of this river. You can focus on the middle of that chart where when the river level was low in 2019, 2020, 2021 under natural conditions, China's dams removed more than 30% of that natural flow and kept them in their reservoirs and then released them during the following dry season. But now we're seeing a difference in the amount of water that's taken out, a kind of a more muted approach. And whether this continues, whether this is a result of understanding of what the downstream needs, that those dams shouldn't be taking as much water out because the ecology downstream needs the water. This is something that can be tested over time. But interestingly, in 2024, during the wet season, 18% of wet season flow to the Chengseng gauge in Thailand was removed. And then you can see that in the subsequent dry season, that's the purple bar in 2024, less was released. So that means those reservoirs are storing more water. So there's more water in those reservoirs now, which means there's less that it needs to take from the natural flow during 2025 to fill them up. So these are this is a better situation. And it bodes decently well. Alan's going to get into that for how much water will be restricted during this current wet season in China's dams. Now, interestingly, overall throughout the entire basin, the dam releases in the 2025 dry season from December 2024 to May 31st, 2025 were the highest that we've observed since doing the Mekong Dam Monitor. But they didn't all come from China. So this is the right sidebar that you see in 2025. Laos has some large dams too, and those dams released more water than ever before, at least in the 5 years that we've been doing this work. And that translated to higher than normal river levels downstream. So you hear China's dams and Laos's dams really working together to change the natural flow or the flow pattern of the river system. Now we can observe how those impacts carried out across various gauges. Here we're going to focus on the Chengseng gauge in northern Thailand, the Nakhon Phanom gauge in Thailand, and the Stung Treng gauge in Cambodia. These are kind of our three gauges that we look at across the basin, upper, middle, and lower, to see what the impacts of dams are. And as you look at these charts on the right, you can see the blue line is that natural flow pattern where there's typically a valley achieved in the dry season during March or April. When you look at the bars, this is what actually happened, what was recorded at the gauge. And what we do is we find what part of that water was released from a dam. Remember, dams release their water during the dry season for hydropower production. So those are the not light blue colors. The purple color we added on top of that light blue bar to say this is how high the river would have. This is the amount of water that was released from a dam, and it varies month to month. Purple is China's dams. The light green, those represent Laos' largest dams. The yellow are the 3S dams in Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. So the top of those bars, that represents what actually happened. That's what you want to compare to the line. And we can see that in every month, flow is by and large higher than the long-term average. And that's what dams do. There were times that the light blue bar is higher than the long-term average. That's under natural conditions. So that's interesting. And again, there's variability. But if you look at Chengseng at the top in February, China's dams released a lot of water and it tripled the flow amount. It tripled the amount of natural flow that would have been running through the river. In March, those releases doubled the flow pattern and it created this kind of very erratic flow pattern that we saw on the second to last graph. Farther downstream, there are more dams and their impacts that contribute to the changing the natural flow of the Mekong. So in February at Nakhon Phanom, you have a combination of Laos's dams and China's dams um, raising the flow by 91%. In March, 183%. These are big increases, right? More China's dams purple than, say, Laos's dams. Nakhon Phanom in April, 139% more flow than would have been there during natural conditions. And those conditions are much higher than normal. And it's important for the river to be low during the dry season, naturally. This is how fish feed themselves on the plants that expose themselves during the dry season. If those plants aren't exposed, then they're flooded out and they die. And then the fisheries, their health patterns and their feeding patterns change. There are many other types of impacts that come from a higher than normal river level during the dry season. And then down in Stung Treng, far away from China's dams, 2,000 kilometers, you can still see the impact of China's dams raising the level of the river 164%. Again, combined with other dams in April, 117%. So this is how dams are bringing higher levels to the Mekong. And in many ways, it's similar to 2022, which was the last year where we saw massive releases coming out of these dams. We've lost the natural kind of low valley pattern that comes during the dry season and introduced very erratic monthly higher river levels during the dry season. And if you tuned into our wet season 2024 event, you would have learned that we are speculating that we're observing lower than normal natural conditions for river flow. So we're able to take out the impacts of the dams and see how the river would be flowing under natural conditions. And 2022, 2023, 2024, both Changsen, at Changsen and then at Stung Treng 2023 and 2024, natural flow is much lower than normal. And we began to speculate why. We don't necessarily have the tools to know why natural flow is lower than normal. We hope that science partners can come in and help us. It likely has something to do with higher temperatures during the dry season, creating more evaporation from the ground. There's less groundwater. And now also the snowpack situation up in the headwaters. And I think Alan's going to talk to us about that, that there's less snow melting. Therefore, the natural river is lower than the long-term mean. But in 2025, it came back. Natural flow was at the mean level. So the river goes through these periods of climate variability, ups and downs. That's built into the climate of the river. What the river is not used to is the impact of dams. And that's what we're beginning to see. So that's my review of the dry season. I'm going to pass it over to Alan to talk about what's happening right now. Happy to take your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. That was a good overview and a good segue into what I'm going to share in the presentation. So as the slide that you're seeing on your screen, we're looking at March, April, May, and then the most recent month of June. On the top are temperature anomalies, and at the bottom maps are surface wetness anomalies. So we'll start with temperature, and we'll start on the far left. The temperatures were clearly above average, long-term average, got a 30-year average in which we compare. And we're seeing temperatures much warmer than average, almost through that entire basin in March, and definitely much warmer than average in April. And so you could prescribe this to natural variability. We're seeing this as a fairly common occurrence, so you may associate some of it to climate change as well, warmer than average temperatures during the dry season. If we look down at the bottom two maps for March and April, and we look at the wetness, we'll see a couple of things of note. First is that we're seeing much above average wetness in March and April in the headwaters, and this is associated with earlier than average snowmelt. So above average temperatures associate with earlier than average snowmelt in the headwaters. And of course, that's going to bring a lot of water into the upper basin and then down to Changsen and noted in the gauge. You can look at the lower basin and you could see that generally March was about average, maybe slightly drier than average, but there's wet spots. As a climatologist, to me, it's worth noting that we're seeing above average wetness along the Lao-Vietnam border, and that's associated with more common easterly trades in March, and you see a little bit in April as well, as Brian has alluded, clearly in March. And those are basically the trade winds coming out the South China Sea. And you can see that above average wetness in March and April down into the Delta, which is where Brian is pointing right now. And that's due to two things. One is there's more water coming down the river because of dam releases. And two is that Vietnam is very extensive in their capacity to hold that water and irrigate their rice fields, their shrimp paddies, where they're raising shrimp. And so there's a lot of water that's being held in the delta from the excess water coming from upstream and used for irrigation supply. Now let's go back up to the top for May and June. I think two things to note. You could see again above average temperatures in May. You can see that again above average melting in the snowpack in the headwaters in the upper basin. And you can see that it was actually fairly dry in Laos and going into Vietnam, the 3S basin, but it much wetter than average down in Cambodia and the southern part of northeast Thailand. In fact, those high wetness values were associated, and we'll see it in a moment, with the Tonle Sap Lake rising and actually starting to flow out to the Mekong. And so we move over to June, and you can see temperatures were cooler than average across most of the Mekong Basin, also in May. And you can see that the headwaters now have all the snow's melted by June. Usually the snow's melting in May and June, but that snow is already melted. So below average wetness in the headwaters. And you can see that about average wetness throughout the rest of the basin. Some areas are wetter than average in May and June, and some areas are basically wetter and some areas are drier. So about average for May and June. But the Tonle Sap definitely rose due to extreme wetness around the basin. And so we're moving on to the next slide. And you can see, because this is a series of weekly maps, we're going through May right now, and you can look at that. All that wetness around the basin caused the Tonle Sap to rise and to start flowing out towards the Mekong. But
Now,
then in June,
what brought
yeah,
about that wetness in May?
the wetness in May was mostly through southern rainfall coming off of the Gulf of Thailand into the Cardamom Mountains and then up into the larger Tonle Sap Basin. So it was rainfall driven. And you can see that here. There's May. You can see it extending into late May. And then it started to dry out. So in early June, the Tonle Sap Basin actually got much drier and the lake was starting to contract, but then the Mekong reversed. So in the latter part of June, the reversal of the Mekong came in earlier than we've seen in many years, bringing the Tonle Sap Lake to rise. And we can see that very clearly here on the red line. The red line is 2025. You can look at other lines for 2024, 23, and 21. But let's focus on the 2025. You could see that earlier than the previous years, there starts to be a reversal in June. And this is healthy. This is really healthy for the Tonle Sap Basin and for the expansion of the lake, bringing in the spawn, bringing in the nutrients, bringing in the larvae, and promoting healthy fish growth and productivity around the Tonle Sap Lake, which is one of the richest fisheries in the world. And so we can see that looks like it's very promising that we're getting an early start to the reversal. Let's hope it continues. It doesn't peter out, but that continues to bring in the water and the lake continues to expand. We can see what happened on the plot to the right. The gray means water is basically coming into the basin, into Tonle Sap Basin. So that's reverse. And so that is the reversal. coming in, and then the black is when the water's coming out. So the gray is the water's coming in from the reversal, the black is the water's leaving. And we saw
And
in
importantly, Alan, importantly, that's 2024 that we're looking at
right, I'm sorry.
as an
And so
example.
so that's what happened in 2024 as the wet season in May through basically October. And then it started, the Mekong dropped, which it normally does. And we started to see the water that had expanded into the lake in late 2024. And we started to see it drain out back towards the Mekong. Something to note right here, and we brought it up in the slide previously, is that in March, and into April, there started to be a little bit of a reversal. The Tonle Sap was very low at that point. The excess water from the dam releases allowed the Mekong to rise above its normal level, and it started to reverse a little bit. That reversal, of course, stopped in May as the rains around the Tonle Sap Lake expanded the water in the lake, rose the lake, and it started to drain out again. But that has now changed again. And now with the reversal, we should start to see a large area of gray as the Tonle Sap Lake continues to rise due to the reversal of flow from the Mekong, as the mightiness of the Mekong starts to develop in the wet season. So let's see what it's doing on the different gauges. And you can see the blue line is the average. The black line is the maximum, and the line to the bottom, kind of a dark red, is the minimum flow. And you can see that at Changshen, we're actually about average, a little bit above it, a little bit below earlier, and that's when the reversal happened. And then I'm sorry, let me say that again. In June, we started to see the reversal happen in late June is when we really start to see it happen as the river started to rise. And you can see it even a little clearer at Kaphong Panong and even stronger at Strongchen. So you can start to see that the river is rising above average, even above the long-term average. And that's wonderful. I mean, that I can only say it again, that having the reversal start in June, which is climatologically normal, and a good pulse of water coming into the Tonle Sap Lake is really a positive sign for the fisheries and the vitality and the health of the Mekong basin, and particularly the Tonle Sap Lake. So let's go to this next slide, and we'll see what's happening at the Chen Chen gauge. The blue is basically what is normal flow. And the dark line above it is the I'm sorry, I'm going to say that differently. The dark line above it is basically what would be normal flow, and the blue is what is actually being received. So we're starting to see already that the water is being held back. Now, not a lot. Not a lot of water is being held back in the month of June, but there is basically some of the water is being used to fill the reservoirs upstream. I hope that it remains moderate and they allow most of the wet season pulse, particularly early in the wet season, to continue to flow downstream and to swell the Tonle Sap Lake and to promote the fertility in the lake.
So Alan,
And
if I can jump in here, you see
sure.
the purple on the bar on the right, that's the amount of restrictions that have been held back in China's dams. And you see it carry through from Changsan to Nakhon Phanom to Stung Treng. So the river would have been 30% higher without China's dams restrictions at Changsan. The river would have been 13% higher at Nakhon Phanom in Thailand, and then 5% higher at Stung Treng. There's a bit of 3S dam restrictions there, but by and large, there is an impact. It's not small, 30% is not small, but at the same time, as we saw on the last slide, the river level is around average. So it's an interesting situation where Alan and I were talking about this last night, that the restrictions so far have been somewhat muted. Alan, what's your recommendation for the rest of the wet season then?
Well, this is something that we did speak about last night, and it's very encouraging that the amount of water being held back is relatively moderate compared to other years that we've seen. Now, part of that is that there's more water coming from the upper basin, and part of it is the restrictions are more moderate. So this is something that we would like to see continue through the early part of the wet season, a gradual and more moderate approach towards water restrictions in the early part of the wet season, because this is what's needed to expand the lake and to promote the fisheries and the fertility in the Tonle Sap Lake. And so if what we've noticed over the last 5 years, so it's been a fairly robust and consistent signal, is that the wet season seems to be starting off about average or even below average, but it continues to extend into October and November. So what we would like to recommend is that to continue to have moderate restrictions during the early part of the wet season. And then if there's a need to top off the reservoirs, there tends to be and consistently a signal of above average wetness in October and November. And so that's a perfectly good time. You're not interfering with the fisheries nearly to the extent that you would earlier in the wet season, to top off the reservoirs and then have the full capacity to use the reservoirs effectively for hydroelectric during the dry season, and yet minimize the impact on fisheries and the vitality of the river and the Tonle Sap Basin during the critical time early in the wet season.
So thank you, Alan. And that's our analysis of what happened during the dry season and where we are now. So Courtney, back to you, and we're happy to take questions from anyone in the audience calling in.
Indeed, and just as a reminder, we will do a Q&A session at the end. So if anyone has outstanding questions for Alan and Brian on their overview of what's been happening and what's sort of the projection for the coming months, please go ahead and drop those into the Q&A and we'll pull from them during that discussion. But in the interim, we are going to pivot slightly to focus on a different angle and some recent events that have been very publicly discussed and sort of are important for the health of the Mekong River. So we're going to have sort of a three-person panel discussion looking at very specifically a recent incident with pollution on key tributaries into the Mekong. So the Kok and Sai rivers along Thailand's border with Myanmar, just ahead of Songkran celebrations this year, water levels were tested there and eventually revealed significantly higher than healthy levels of arsenic in particular. This has been broadly linked to unregulated mining, which has been going on across the border in recent years, first of gold and then of critical rare earth minerals. So we're going to have a discussion of three panelists joining us today to focus on that issue, because it's obviously not the only incident of mining pollution globally, but it is very important for the health of the Mekong and Chiang Rai area, and potentially something that we'll see as an increased challenge, not just in the Mekong, but more broadly in coming years, given the rise in mining and the emphasis on critical minerals in particular. So I'm going to turn things over to our colleagues for an in-depth discussion on that. So we're going to have sort of a mini moderated session from Stefan Lofgren, who's an author, journalist, and filmmaker. He's award-winning. He's got 25 years or more of worldwide reporting experience and has very regularly contributed to National Geographic over the last 20 years or so. And so he's going to lead that discussion. He's going to be joined by one of our longtime colleagues and friends, Pai Dietz, who's the Southeast Asia Program Regional Campaigns Director for International Rivers, as well as Kun Apinun Suvarnaksha, who's from Maijo University, Thailand, and is an associate professor there. So without further ado, Stefan, I'm happy to turn things over to you to sort of run this mini discussion. And again, please, if anyone has questions on this topic, do submit them to the Q&A, and we'll do a Q&A at the end of the session.
Great. Well, thank you, Courtney, for that introduction. Like you said, my name is Stefan Lofgren, and I am a journalist and also researcher at the University of Nevada, Reno. And until recently, I've been working with the Wonders of the Mekong project in Southeast Asia and traveling a lot in the region and doing a lot of different stories. And I was in Thailand in May and traveled up to Chiang Rai. And I'd heard about this pollution event in the Kok River, which is a tributary to the Mekong, an important tributary, and that runs through Chiang Rai. And I was told that there had been reports of people sick from coming in contact with the river, and that testing had revealed, like you said, dangerously high arsenic levels in the river. Um, Arsenic pollution, as you know, arsenic is a toxic element that's very, very dangerous to humans and animals. It actually occurs naturally in mineral-rich bedrock, and is often released when the gold-bearing ore is crushed. And so this was supposed to or suspected to come from across the border in Myanmar, where the rivers originate. I say rivers, so Kok and the Sai rivers, which are both tributaries to the Mekong, and both originate in Myanmar. And this is an area where gold mining has proliferated in recent years. But there were also reports of some new mining activity for rare earth metals, satellite and drone images showing such sites. And but of course, this is a place where information is very hard to come by from inside of Myanmar. Southern Shan State in Myanmar is an area that is essentially lawless and controlled by armed groups like the United Wa State Army, which is essentially a Chinese proxy group. So the assumption is that the mining is controlled by China. And I know that there's also been reports of videos on Chinese social media that have suggested that much of what is produced in Myanmar ends up, being sold to Chinese buyers. So there was further testing that showed widespread contamination in both of these rivers, and especially close to the Thai-Myanmar border. But when I was there was also reports of this contamination being detected in the main stem Mekong River, which of course is cause for alarm. The government has told people not to come in contact with the river. This is probably Thailand's and Pai, you can speak to this, but Thailand's largest ever case of transboundary pollution. And it seems to me that the story, I haven't been there for the past month, but it seems to me that the story has sort of grown in urgency, and people are starting to realize the widespread impacts of this. So I would like to bring Pai and Apinun into the conversation, and they can provide an update as to what's been going on since I was there. Pai and Apinun, thanks for joining us. I'm curious, how did you first hear about this problem, and what was your reaction to it?
Sure, I can start, and I have some slides to share. Yeah, so we were on the Kok River, where in Thaton sub-district of Mae Ai district of Chiang Mai in northern Thailand back in February, and villagers show us like the unusual turbidity of the river. It looked like this when it just first entered the border from Shan State to Thailand to Chiang Mai, then flow into Chiang Rai. Later on March 14, which is the International Day of Action for Rivers, some 700 villagers and Buddhist monks in Thaton sub-district in Chiang Mai, they had a gathering, peaceful gathering, and trying to express their concern about the unusual condition of the Kok River. And they said that their siblings, their relatives that living across the border in Chan State inform them that there are some mining activities happening upstream and not far from the Thai border. Later on, uh, a few letters and petitions submit to multiple state agencies in Thailand, including the Parliament Committee on Environment and Parliament's Committee on National Security, that they had held the meeting and invite Thai authorities to share what do they know about the mining activities upstream. And this is imagery from Thai official satellite authority JISTA, that they revealed that 2 years back there was almost nothing happened, but last year 2024 in the middle we see clearer expansion of some activities upstream of the Kok and Sai River. Then this year there are 40 more spots that they found that they are potentially mining or other activities that clear the forest and upstream of our rivers. And thanks to the foundation, Chan Human Rights Foundation, our colleagues that work for human rights promotion and in Chan State, that they bought satellite imagery that revealed there is not just gold mining activities upstream of Chiang Rai, but also starting point of at least already a few seem to be rare earth mining activities upstream of the Kok River, which is around less than 25 kilometers upstream of Chiang Mai border, and maybe around 2 kilo from the Kok River mainstream. And when we heard about this, at first we thought that the gold mining, and we already worried about the impacts because of arsenic contamination and other heavy metals. But now, when it comes to be rare earth, it would be even more deadly. And for us, we have really limited information, so we seek information and lessons from our colleagues that work in Kachin State, northern Myanmar, where known for up to 300, 400 illegal mining for rare earth mining and export to China, and create devastation on environment and human and public health. Luckily enough that we still have the functioning state authority, which I would say that the pollution control department, they work very well, that they already had, after the submission, they first had the first water testing in late March after the protest. Then later on the first test release in early April, and they conduct regularly biannual water testing, and now they expand the station to 27 stations from the first place where the Kok River entered Thailand all the way to Chiang Rai city, and all the way to the mouth of the Kok River, which flow into the Mekong, as well as on the Sai River and the Ruak River, and at the Golden Triangle on the Mekong River. What I find pretty solid is that in their fifth test results that they just released last week, at first they found arsenic acid contamination in various areas along the Kok River as well as on the Mekong, but the latest tests indicate that there are not only arsenic but also lead and manganese. You can find in this more simplified map that along the Kok River, arsenic, lead, and manganese, as well as on the Sai River, because these two rivers share the same mountain range where the gold mining, manganese mining, and as well as the rare earth mining still start to happen. The resident of Chiang Rai is not sitting still at all. When they heard about this in March, they got together and tried to submit petition or letters to, I would say, more than dozen of the authorities already. And on World Environmental Day in June, they up to almost 2,000 people gathered and submit letter to the Thai government once again to solve this problem immediately, because not just the environment but also public health is about our own body and our next generation, and the particularly the fragile group, including the pregnant women and small children. And in that date, we were informed that the Thai government already sent letter to the Burmese junta to call for a meeting on this, but we haven't heard that if that already organized. That was to me as an activist working on the Mekong for almost 23 years. This is the first time that I find when we organize such gathering in a province like Chiang Rai, and we have more than, I think, 100 cameras, which show that most of these are local journalists or just like influencers, like TikToker or YouTubers. But this indicate pretty clearly that how people in the local area aware of this disaster, and they think because Chiang Rai, we rely 1.2 million people rely on Kok River for water supply, for irrigation, and for other activities. And I believe that Janapinan can describe more on this. The features not only in the Kok River but also on the Mekong River. Recently, in the past 6 months, regularly catch this kind of smaller fish catch that seem to be, I don't know how to call it, disease or whatever. And they say that this is pretty normal for the past 6 months. Like these are like baby fish. And when this was covered in the news, because the look is not, pretty scary. So what's upset is that the fishery department say that this is just parasite and when cooked should be fine. But this should not be the explanation to the population. So I would hand over to Ajahn Pinan to describe more on this. But so this is the first round of me as a environmental activist working on the Mekong, but also resident of Chiang Rai as a direct affected person. This is for us. This is very new, the whole new challenge. And we really need more information, and we really need more stronger action, not only from the government of Thailand, but also counterpart from China, because it is known that most of the rare earth mineral export directly to China, and China is now the largest rare earth exporter at the global level.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Pai. So maybe we should, if we can bring in Apinon here. You teed it up very nicely for him. Apinon is a fisheries expert. So Apinon, if you could bring us up to date and talk a little bit about your what you've found, and speak directly to the issue of the fish and what has been the impact on fish consumption in the area. Are people afraid of eating fish, and should they be afraid?
Yeah, thank you also, because the fish is a fish maybe I think is not the origin of the problem, because the problem of the fish, like Pai show in her picture, that means this the late of the period for the fish there, because that fish that is a carnivorous fish. They eat a lot of fish before, and also in the water column, like in the sediment, also in the plankton and invertebrate something. They contain a lot. Why they become the scale like that? Because I hope, because I check already, not only the parasite in my opinion is not only the parasite, because when before parasite, that means they are weak, the fish they will be weak, and then the parasite infect. And normally the parasite infect not like that. Is when the parasite infect just only a spot, not whole body like that. That's one that in the soft tissue, all the soft tissue of the fish infect, and after infects long time, they become the change. The tissue will be changed, become maybe I cannot say cancer, but it look like cancer in the fish, because they infect a long time. Also the fish. Now the people who are in that area, they don't want to eat any fish, but some of them also, they still are fishermen in the Mekong River. In the Mekong River, I hope not only in my opinion, not only from the Mekong River and Sai River, that's all. Maybe I think in the upper part of the in the Myanmar side or in Laos side, they will have some of the maybe rare earth mining in the northern also. Because why? Not only in the Mekong River they get the fish life, also in the Mekong mainstream. That means not only from the pollution, not only from both two rivers. That means if we have a connection together with some guy in Laos, in northern Laos, in nearby upper part of Thai borders, and also in the Myanmar, I think more than that. And now, what happened with the fish? Because the fish there, when the fish they had the signal, that like a signal of the fish life, that mean in the water supply for the people who are living there from Mae Ai something until to the mouth of the river Kok to Mekong. That means many of them they are not only in the fish but for the rice field, in the rice field, in the algae, it will be effect for the from the pollution there. And I think not only three of like a lead, like a arsenic or something. I think another one like a palladium or another mineral. We will check it, but a very expensive equipment to do that. And now in Chiang Rai and in Chiang Mai also, the Thai government, they are set up the team how to solve the problem. And many of scientists, we are working for that. And we are looking also for the next next like a next project to continuously, not only from in Chiang Rai, that's all, or in Chiang Mai. It should be along the river, like downstream to Laos border, and also downstream to the northeastern part of Thailand until to Vietnam, the mouth of the Mekong River. Because if we can do like that, we can be clearly about the pollution can be affect to the fish and also can be effect to the people who are living along the Mekong River. It's not only 1.2 million in Thai border, so many in Laos, because in Laos border they have a population just only 6 million, and a half of them they use Mekong River as a life for them for their life. And also in Tonle Sap that you are referred before, that means many of the water they are running from the northern part of Thai until to Tonle Sap and also to the end of the Mekong River in the mouth in Vietnam. That means we should have a cooperation together to check as how they from. Like we can use the stable isotope, or maybe it's some of DNA, or some to check some of strontium and the concentration of some of the pollution. We can working together. In the future, I think now the people in Chiang Mai, in Chiang Rai, they allowed to do that. But in the future, we should give our information not only for Thai border. We should be give the information to Laos and maybe some friend in Cambodia also. Yes, thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much for that. I'm curious, what is could you give us an idea of what the river looks like now? Is there any kind of discoloration, or what does the river look like in Chiang Rai and also upstream?
Yes, because now normally for the Kok River, I very often to visit there because I'm looking for the fish along the times. Normally in the dry season, like March, April, March, something, very clear water in every year like that. We use as a watering festival every year in Mekong River at the big festival. And now everything along the year become turbid water. And also when you are when you use the water there, you may can get some something on you use the face, maybe you can feel your eyes burn, something like that. Now is quite dangerous for us. And upper part that I told you, I think in my opinions, because I looking roughly from the Google map. Also, I found some place they have some place they are open for they cut off the tree. They are open for the mining. They have also you can check because not only for that I think.
I have a quick question for Pai and Apinun. What typically happens along the river? How do people typically use these tributaries? What would we typically see people doing in the river?
That you mean Mekong River, right?
The Kok or the Ying, yeah, or the sorry,
Uh,
the Kok or the Ruak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, mainly Mekong River is a you can in the northern part of Thailand we have a local irrigation. When we use water from the river, they have a small canal of the irrigation directly to the rice field, to the fish pond or something like that. And also some of them they use not only for that, they use for the consumption in the family. That means this normal life for them. They do that because it's very clear water from the upper part in the former times. But now everything is changed, completely changed. How they survive because they still need a food from the river. They still need water to watering the plant and also in the rice field. But now everything they can't say now. They keep quiet. I don't know how to do that because our government they acting a lot, but we can't do anything with the transborder.
Great.
I like
The
to add,
Yeah, go
people,
ahead.
yeah, people in the basin has been pretty worried about the flood because last year flood in September was pretty devastating, and this year we're already aware of this rare earth mining. So what would happen if the flood happen again with toxic or heavy metal contaminates? So we still do not have like protocol or good suggestion what to behave and what to prevent. And then the other thing is that the Pak Bang Dam project, which is like hydropower project in Laos, southern downstream of Chiang Rai uh, province border. They just the project company just organized what they call meeting for the transboundary impact assessment just the end of June. And we inform them that given the toxic contamination due to the illegal mining upstream, maybe we recommend that the Pak Bang Dam project should be halted until this problem is solved. Otherwise, the reservoir will become dead pool, right? It will be toxic reservoir completely. So what would happen after that to the fisheries and other aquatic lives and the public health too?
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I just traveled through that area where the Pak Bang site is on the Mekong, and it's interesting because there's no signs of any construction or no machinery, nothing there. It's completely pristine. But Pai, you call this an environmental crime. Is this something that you've encountered before?
I never thought I would experience anything like this at this level of the deadly. And I think the Mekong is almost 300 kilometers, and half of it is in Thailand. And all the spots along the Kok River in Thailand already contaminated with heavy metal above the standards, as well as the Mekong River. So this is the largest ever riverine pollution officially recognized. And this needs to be solved immediately, I think.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, we say, this is something that needs to be solved immediately. Of course, there's, give us a sense of, the difficulties of, doing that and just simply establishing what is going on in this very volatile area. We're talking about inside of Myanmar.
Yeah, exactly, because it's happened in the country and in the corner where there is no such law. That's how it's allowed illegal mining to happen and smuggling and extract all these mineral and export back to China without proper environmental and safety standard at all. So I don't know what to call it, despite the organized environmental crime.
Yes,
Right.
I also agree with Pai. Because now the big problem is not only China, because many of us we use a lot of rare earth in the world. Because the starting is not only from the earth, from the mining in Myanmar. Because if we can be stop something, not only talking about the problem here, but we should talking about the big problem in the world, how we use and where the rare earth we go, they go, then how they can be used for many high technology. They use the rare earth, but it's impossible to control in Myanmar now, because in the Myanmar side, all of us we know what happened in that area. That means how we talk together with we cannot do anything in Thai parts now. I don't know how to solve this problem. I have some data, but when I talk to many of them, they told me no, it's not easy to find to talking with the Myanmar Myanmar government, because that area not belong to the Myanmar government, something like that.
Yeah. I think it's also important to point out that Myanmar is, in fact, the number one supplier of rare earth metals to China. More China gets something like 60-70% is what the numbers that I've heard of its rare earths from Myanmar. What is maybe Apnu, you can talk a little bit about the what the Thai government's response has been. What kind of pressures can it apply on China? And do you see these efforts as sort of adequate so far?
Yes, in Thai government, Thai part, we are invited some of Chinese government, the local Chinese government in Thailand to talking together and how they can be solve the problem, and also they give some notice to the Myanmar government also, both two way. We try to do that, and how to talk on the table and how to solve the problem together, because now exactly in Mekong River take a longer times, I think more than 30 years, how to solve the problem, because now fully our pollution in Mekong River. This is a seriously problems now in Thailand. Not only, yep,
If I can interject, Ajahn Apinun said 30 years, right, to clean this.
maybe more longer,
Right.
yes.
I mean, this type of mining can kill a river system, can make it absolutely unusable for decades, if not longer. And that's what's happening here. This is the most underreported major issue in the Mekong happening now. And it's happening upstream in Myanmar where there's no governance, right? So Ajahn Apinun, you mentioned that you talked to the Myanmar government. Well, they don't govern there. They don't have
Yes,
any power
yes,
over
yes,
where these mines are. And
yep.
Beijing, I would assume Beijing has no control over it either. I mean, these are bad guy miners, like true villains, out of the control of anyone. This is like the Wild West in the United States, when you could go and mine anywhere without any regulation and pollute as much as you want. And there's no one to stop them. That's the severity and the extreme situation that we're dealing with here. And I don't know how it can end.
Yeah,
Yeah,
in my view, I would say that at least at the end, rare earth, these elements will be exported back to China, legally or illegally. So if the importing country would like to act more responsible manner, there are ways to monitor the import. So I'm sure that this is possible, as well as to Thailand, that there are also there's petrol or other machinery export from Thailand, from Chiang Rai border to Chan State of Myanmar related to these activities. So I think that if the government really want to act on this, there are ways. And just to add on the rare earth mining, I would say this is just year two of the rare earth mining happening above upstream of our river. But in Kachin State, during the past 10 years, already 300 mines and polluting all the rivers and the hills. So this for us, this is just the first chapter of the disaster. If we want to fix it, do it right now because there are just a few of them.
Yeah, Pai, I mean, are you aware of any other instances where rare earth mining or where there's been any kind of analysis or studies on like how rare earth mining is affecting rivers in particular, or is this the first case that we're looking at?
I think in Kachin State in northern Myanmar is the very solid example, but too bad over there is no such uh, lab or test or researchers that can monitor the impacts regularly. And there are quite a few researchers from UK and from other universities that we're trying to contact and trying to get information and knowledge from them. That's already happening over there.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, just finally, and Brian makes a very important point about this being a long-term problem that we're going to have to deal with for a very long time. But is there anything that you would like to see in the short term? What are some of the things that we should be focusing on in the short term?
You asking me?
Sure.
Yeah, I think if there is any satellite owner can provide us imagery of the truck with logos or anything with like we can identify who are these people, where and what the company they are, or identify them because the after the June 5th, the Environmental Day, the Chinese embassy in Bangkok had a Facebook post mentioning that they recognize this problem upstream of the Kok and Sai River, and they need to ensure that they need to identify that is this Chinese people or Chinese companies, and they ensure that the companies have to comply with the local legal laws and regulation. So I think we are robbed, and but we need to tell the police that who are these people. So if any evidence possible, that could be very, very helpful for us to identify them.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, that there was that acknowledgement by the Chinese embassy in Bangkok. Great. Courtney, do you want to open things
Yes.
up for other questions?
Yes, I'm happy to do so. I see we've got a good number of questions already sort of in the lineup, and I'm happy to sort of pull from those. But if people have additional questions, please go ahead and submit them into the queue there. I am, in the interest of time, going to possibly group a few of them together. And I think actually I'm going to continue in the vein of sort of this mining pollution discussion because we do have a few good questions there that I think will build directly on what was just asked, and then we'll make sure we leave some time at the end to transition back to sort of the forecasting and the river level and dam management questions. So I think you've already sort of answered one question to some degree, which was a question about what's the lifespan of these elements and how long they last in the river system. We already talked a little bit about how this is a long problem, and it will potentially only get worse because we're only in the first couple of years of this. So Pai, you did a good job highlighting that challenge. I think I'm going to then transition to the latter portion of that question from Nirmal Ghosh, which is how far downstream from Chiang Rai have these pollutants been detected in the Kok and the Mekong? Have they been detected at Pak Bang? And sort of just building on those questions, what level of additional testing is necessary to understand the true impact of these in the river system? I know, Ajahn Apinun, that you also highlighted this is not the only rare earth mining that's happening in the region. Obviously, we are seeing, along with that rising demand in China, interest in Laos, in other parts of Myanmar, and other parts of potentially the Mekong Basin in doing critical earth mining extractives. So what is needed to test for that?
Yeah.
I guess, would you like to jump in first with some thoughts on that, Kun Apinun, and then we can turn over to Pai if she has additional comments?
Oh, no, that's okay.
Yeah, I think
I can hear not clearly. Yes.
Sorry, I'll repeat the question very quickly. So the question is essentially, what additional testing do you think is necessary further beyond the scope of what's already been tested just in the Kok and the Sai rivers? How far downstream should the testing go, and what gaps or needs do you see to ensure that that testing can take place?
Okay, because this Kok and Sai River in Thai border is not so long, just maybe a short less than 100 kilometers. Then mainly now we can check just only in Thai border until to the border of Laos. That's all. But I think in nearby future this pollution may be going down by the river to downstream longer and longer, and the effect, because now I'm not so sure if we can check it or not, because now the government, the Thai part, both fishery department and the environmental department also, they check it, and we waiting for the group they have a team to working for that, and they are like look after for the river.
Yeah, just to clarify, we have seen elevated levels in the main stem in the Mekong River itself, correct?
Because the fish they got from the Mekong mainstream in the mouth of the Kok River. That means in my opinion, I think also it happened in Mekong River.
I have a question about the transboundary nature of this issue. It seems like there's a research and a crisis management job for the Mekong River Commission here, particularly since the polluted water is going from Myanmar, not a member of the Mekong River Commission, into Thailand, which is a member of the Mekong River Commission, and into Laos, which also is a member. That the MRC can take up some of the responsibility for testing, as they do have testing teams for pollution levels. So have you seen the Mekong River Commission act or respond to this issue, Pai or Apinun?
No, not yet. Not yet. I never get any information from the MRC now. But maybe I think they're still going on to work, but not yet information to give us.
I believe that the Mekong River Commission must be working on this because they have the water quality control, the procedure on water quality control, but it's not too that obvious that we are seeing that the active role of the organization. But at least I believe that they one time a few weeks back there are news that they already submit a comment and contact Burmese counterpart to have a meeting, something like that. But would love to see more proactive role that can be very helpful because it's already exceeding our border and flowing into the Mekong River into Laos, and there should be more regular water quality testing along the Mekong River as well, so that we can identify which part is safe or which part is risk, so that the crisis management can be performed. And other thing is that because at first we thought that it was just gold mining, that's why the testing parameter was on heavy metals. But now when it happened to be rare earth minerals, there will be radioactive and other kind of parameter to test. So that's beyond my knowledge, but I'm sure that there need to be further examination on this.
Well, the CEO of the Mekong River Commission is a Thai national, Kun Busidi Santipak, and I imagine this issue is close to her heart. So we should all try to communicate and bring as much evidence to the MRC as possible.
And the MRC and the development partner just had meeting in Chiang Rai just last week, but we didn't hear any strong comments on this yet. So hopefully there'll be some support from the MRC on this important issue.
Thank you. And just to sort of build on something you asked as well as one of the questions, Pai, you had mentioned earlier the concerns about the reservoirs collecting these minerals, particularly the pollution, and particularly at Pak Bang. Do you think that there is the technical capacity inside Laos and inside some of the other agencies that it should be overseeing this to do the water testing? Is it a resource issue? Is it a technical issue? Because this is a relatively new level of pollution that they would have to be tracking. There may not be equipment on the ground. Just touching on those needs, do you see a need for international assistance in terms of capacity building or equipment or support?
Definitely, I think once it's about rare earth mining could be beyond the capacity of existing capacity of the states or of the authorities in the region. So it is very important to receive or get more support, technical support or other kind of support from international partners. But one thing is the political will of the countries, how to look at this problem in a responsible way and be accountable to your own people and the health of the river and the public health. And I would say that as a resident here, I would like to see further or increase political will from my own governments as well as referent governments or related governments.
Thank you. And just sort of building on that question, you've all highlighted the local impacts as they're quite severe and quite serious, particularly for communities that rely on the river system for irrigation and for agriculture. Just thinking of sort of the broader implications, we had a comment from Matthew Anderson from ESGS that elevated arsenic is already a problem in rice production, some portions of the Mekong Basin. Obviously, we also know that Thailand and Vietnam in particular are they're major rice exporters. So there is the potential as this issue continues and potentially is exacerbated over time that this will become a more global issue. Do you think that that is an angle through which the Thai government might be, motivated to address this additionally beyond just the local impacts, because this is sort of a rolling issue that could become larger and impact a major export sector? Do you see that as an avenue for engagement, maybe in Thailand and the other Mekong countries as well, to engage with the upstream polluters on this issue?
Yeah, exactly. And rice absorb heavy metal very well. In some places, they grow rice to absorb the heavy metal and dump them, not for eating. So as Ajahn Pinan mentioned, that large area of irrigated rice fields directly from this contaminate river and contaminate water. So it is very important for the government to act immediately, and the health impact would take some time, because the heavy metal impact is not going to happen in 1 or 2 years, but it could be 10 years time that the disease or other kind of symptoms. So yeah, there are cases in Japan that the whole river left alone after 60 years. People cannot touch it at all because the contamination is there in the sediment right in the river. So, and we don't want this to happen to our rivers. And as I mentioned, this is just year 2 of this disaster. We still have chance to stop it.
Yeah. And just to say, prior to this happening, the Kok and the Sai rivers are some of the most pristine, or I'd say that the balance of use between human use and protection was very well struck. And there aren't any large. There's one dam on the Kok River in Chiang Rai, an irrigation dam. There aren't any large dams on it. We've learned that communities upstream, still use the river for fishing. It's an important part of their life. So this has turned a somewhat very ideal situation into a nightmare overnight. And I think Pai and Apinun are really communicating the import of this situation. I do want to thank Matthew Anderson from the U.S. Geological Service for offering to be in communication with Pai and Apinun about this, and we will certainly facilitate that communication.
Also, now we try to do, because for like a stable isotope or something, to check it directly to clear for the origin of the chemical of the pollution. We are looking for the grant to do. Last week I submit my proposal to the government also because when we want to do clearly and to give the information from the scientific information directly to them or not, because some of them they don't know. Until now, we don't know what is the name of the company in the Myanmar side they have done, but it's not easy to clear. But we should use the way of the scientific to clearly this one. I hope the government will be support to me for the grant.
All right, thank you. Well, with that, I think we've touched on most of the questions that were focused on sort of the mining and pollution issues. So certainly we might get more in the chat and we'll share those with our discussants. But I am going to circle back to some of the earlier questions, looking at what's going on in the Mekong more broadly with sort of the seasonal update and the forecasting. So I'll just sort of take those and work through them as we wrap up the call over the next 10 minutes. So Brian and Alan, we had one question early on in the session that was asking about what the overview of the dry season that you gave earlier, what did that mean specifically for flooding in the dry season in the Mekong Delta? Did we see a substantial change in that in this past season due to the increased dry season flows, even though, as you noted early on, the dry season flows this past year were not raised as much as they have been in some previous years?
There's no flooding in the Delta during the dry season in a natural sense. So the wetness that we observe, and Alan can communicate more on this, in Vietnam's Mekong Delta during the dry season, that's all from pumping water out of the river or from underground. Now, and when the water is pumped from underground for irrigation purposes, that creates land subsidence and the land sinks. So when the river level is higher than previous years, as it was, then there's more of an opportunity to irrigate those fields, and it contributes to dry season irrigation. And so that third crop of rice that comes out, I always think of Vietnam, it's third crop, you get the first crop right after the wet season, and there's a second crop around December, and then there's a third crop in March. That third crop is made available by the final water that's coming down the river system during the dry season. And then the cycle repeats itself. The pattern of drought that we observe during the dry season in the Mekong Delta, and that would be red on the map, that has a lot to do with the areas that can't be irrigated because the water would be too salty, and therefore agricultural productivity can't happen. And that land lies fallow and it dries out. So the irrigation isn't working there. And that red zone starts at the coast and it moves its way forward or upstream as the sea level rises. So that's an area that really can't be farmed during the dry season. Alan, thoughts?
I think you answered it quite well. There is excess water during the dry season, and that water definitely is beneficial towards irrigation supply for the Vietnamese. And yeah, I won't add much more to that than what you've already said. I think you addressed the question well.
But importantly, this is what Cambodia wants to do with the Funan Teco Canal, is turn its dry season dry lands into agricultural land using water from the Mekong through the Funan Teco Canal. This is part of the new design of this new canal that China has signed up to build. They're explicitly talking about irrigation. That comes at the expense of Vietnam's water. So whatever's taken out of the water in Cambodia won't go down to Vietnam. And this is why the Mekong River Commission's Mekong Agreement states that dry season use of Mekong mainstream water requires, for diversion purposes or irrigation purposes, requires an international agreement. And it's not happening. So you can see kind of the pressure that's on the land and I guess on these governments to be productive, to convert the land into land for agricultural use. And that pressure is causing a skirting or an avoidance of international law. So we don't want to take our focus off of the Funan Teco Canal. I think now is the time to be watching it, particularly since the new design explicitly mentions irrigation, where the past one did not.
And just to add, now that you brought up the canal, is that canal will bisect the overland flow coming from Cambodia into the Vietnam Delta. So it will, and that's a very important area to feed the flood pulse in southern Cambodia and Vietnam. That's going to be severely disrupted by basically a scar across the overland flow. Dikes and such along the canal will not allow that water to flow as it naturally does.
Can I share a little bit for this one?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. For the water running, that's mean to release from the China and also to release from any place from Laos. It's a exactly affect directly to the fish in the river because when you are release the water in different area, different part, different season, that means the mineral not directly for the fish food, fish consumption, that's for the primary productivities for the small fish. They are breeding in the season. If you are released in different season of the fish breeding, that means not so long the fish in the river will be gone because they cannot reproduction in the river directly. It's one of the most important thing also. Thank you.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for sharing it.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And I'm just going to sort of thinking of sort of impacts on the river system and changes. I'm going to jump into one of the comments which was shared, but which I think has sort of a question implicit in it, which was about the recommendation that you and Brian and Alan made about filling the reservoirs later in the wet season. So you noted that there does in recent years we've seen a trend that there's more rainfall later in the wet season, and that allows for sort of a later expansion, which is obviously out of the seasonal timelines for reproduction that Kun Apinun was just talking about. There was sort of a comment that there's a bit of concern about how that would impact the longevity of the flood pulse, given that if there isn't continued, higher river levels in the Mekong versus the Tonle Sap, that reverse flow can very quickly reverse again. So can you talk a little bit about how, in an ideal world, if there was coordination among dams on when to restrict and release water, how would that be monitored and how would that be managed to avoid an early end to the flood pulse in the Tonle Sap?
So what Alan and I have been seeing is that the larger dams in the Mekong tend to remove the water from the system. Remember, it's not permanent. It's never permanent. It goes back in during the dry season, but they remove it in July and August. So those are like the core wet season months where the Tonle Sap Lake is energizing, right? Where it's getting its energies together so that it can have that big expansion. And when the water is removed during those core earlier months of the wet season, the energy is reduced. And you can actually watch the lake go like this. We called it the accordion effect in one of our reports. And then once the reservoirs fill, there's enough water and the lake can tend to expand, but it's often too late. It's too little too late in the wet season, so that the natural properties of the flood pulse have already been stunted. So what we're seeing in the graph at like Stung Treng and farther downstream is that the flood pulse will take off like this, and then when it hits July and August, there's a dip in it. And that dip often is from both a climate effect, where the climate could be a little weaker, precipitation could be weaker, and the dams are taking the water out when it's there. And if you're a dam operator, if it's raining, you want to fill your reservoir. That's your top priority. All we're saying is look at the forecast. If the forecast is showing that the later months, September, October, November, tend to be looking like they're going to be wet. We live in a day and age where technology can better inform the way that these dams can be operated. And when the connection is made between the ecology of the river, that the flood pulse is important and something that is prioritized and treasured, then those forecasting technologies can be put to use for good. And there's a way to charge the reservoirs as well in a smarter manner. Alan, what would you recommend?
I agree with what you said. I also understand the relevance of Anthony Green's question is that if you pull water out at the end of the wet season and allow the Mekong to drop, then you're going to have an early, basically, flow out of the Tonle Sap Lake. And so that is a concern. So there's no perfect answer. And you have to do cost benefits. I understand Anthony's question is that you want to keep the expansion in the lake as long as possible, keep the breeding and the fish to feeding and growing so that there's a good harvest as the lake drains later in the year and the beginning of the next year. The question is how to maximize the expansion of the lake and maximize the fishing and the fertility of the lake and still basically fill the reservoirs and to keep some natural ecology going. And I agree with you that using technology, knowledge, understanding, and forecast in an educated, informed, cooperative fashion is probably the best solution. And trying to get cooperation and action based upon our knowledge is really the best way to manage the water.
All right, thank you, Brian and Ellen. I know we're approaching the end of our discussion, so I'm going to take one last question that might put us a couple of minutes over simply because I think it is quite relevant. And it's a question to anyone on the panel, but looking at sort of the changes at foreign affairs inside the United States, a lot of programming in the region was previously supported by USAID and the State Department for like Mekong programming. Can you highlight what you see as potential gaps emerging or some just a general update on what the impacts of those changes will be for science in the Mekong?
Yeah, just very quickly, now is the time to be concerned. Stimson, with its privilege of being in Washington and talking with actors within the United States government, we have insight into what's happening at the State Department, the White House, and other agencies that care about the Mekong. There's the Mekong-U.S. Partnership, which is the United States government's regional policy framework towards the Mekong. And then there are many other lines of support, like there have been direct grants issued to the Mekong River Commission in the past, as well as bilateral projects in Cambodia through USAID and the State Department. At this point, I would say make as loud of an appeal that you can, Mekong friends, to Washington and to your governments, because the signals are not looking good for U.S. involvement in the Mekong or prioritization of U.S. government involvement in the Mekong. So that means minimize funding, minimize attention through the Mekong-U.S. Partnership. The possibility of the Mekong-U.S. Partnership being marginalized or even eliminated, it's all on the table. So now is the time to act, and please act smartly. The most important signal that can come to the United States government is from people like you in the region who are following the issues like the transboundary mining pollution issue, dams and their impacts, fisheries health, and how that connects to needs on the ground of the people and how it's hurting people and how it's creating food security issues and water security issues. These are the messages that need to come in right now. Obviously, the United States government can't do everything and never has attempted to do everything. But without the United States government, I think that that a lot of peril can come to the ecology of the Mekong, and there'll be fewer resources to support needs there. So I'm gravely concerned, and now's the time to act.
All right, thank you. Well, I know we're ending on a somewhat sobering note there, but I hope that all of you enjoyed today's discussion. I do see we have a number of additional questions and comments in the thread, so we will share those with all of our panelists. And as we mentioned earlier, this is not a standalone event. This is a regular seasonal update, so Stimson Center will be hosting continued discussion on all of these trends at the transition to the dry season early next year. And we will also, as Brian shared in the comments thread, be hosting, some of our colleagues will be hosting a discussion on rare earth mining in Myanmar in a couple of weeks. So if you're interested in that topic, please do join for that conversation. But thank you everyone for joining. We know some of you called in quite late and a few of you, including Stefan, called in quite early from the West Coast on the United States. So thanks everyone for making this a good discussion. We hope to continue conversations with all of